here in aisle 4, and we're going to go through how to take care of a customer when they come into the store and they need bearings or any of their running gear, because this is you're going to find the majority of things as far as bearings, hubs, all the brake parts and stuff that customers are going to be looking for, you're going to find in this aisle. So today I'm going to kind of show you how to take care of a customer once they come in the store. As far as your resource for helping a customer and the majority of the information that you're going to need, because sometimes you are going to need to get the book out if it's just not something that's going to be in this aisle, or this book, the Redneck Trailer Catalog, will help you to identify and answer some questions to be able to take care of the customer. It's a very good resource. So this should be kind of your Bible as far as, especially as you're learning. You may want to assist a customer, you may want to just grab this particular book and bring it with you, because it's a great resource rather than have to run back and forth. So after we're done with today's training seminar, you're going to want to do the axles, axle components, bearings, and the suspension parts we'll save for another time, which is also part of this aisle, but we're going to break that into a separate segment. I invite you to just go ahead and go through this catalog. I'm going to reference it a couple of times with some specific charts and stuff like that I think you need to be familiar with. So we'll come back to this. The other catalogs that you're going to, other vendors that we use, Rigid Hitch. You're going to find some things in Rigid Hitch. And a lot of this stuff, again, we can get within one day. So they handle some of the UFP parts and some other things that Redneck does not. So, okay, another manual you're going to want to be, or catalog that you're going to want to become familiar with, that we don't use a ton. Again, UFP, some other Elco parts, some stuff that Redneck and some other vendors don't carry, would be the Waymeyer catalog. Again, we can have a product within one day for a customer if it's a special order. You just have to kind of get familiar with this. You're probably going to be coming to myself or Mark as you're dealing with some of these things, but it's just to know that it's one more catalog that you can look to. Sometimes the customer is going to be our best resource. They may know what it is, or may be familiar, they're just looking for it. Sometimes they help you identify what they're looking for in the catalog, and we know that we can order and call and get pricing. And then Franklin Trailers would be another one. They handle some older style trailer parts and some unique parts that we can't get anyplace else. They're out of New Jersey, so it's a 3 or 4 day lead time out of here. We only order from these guys maybe a dozen times a year, so again, it would probably be something that you'd be, at the point you'd be coming to Mark or I to get some assistance as you're learning. I also want to show you a couple of tools that'll make helping the customer in this aisle a lot easier. This is kept back at the service counter. We're probably going to get a couple more for up at the front counter and stuff. But it's just a digital caliper. And a digital caliper, this is nothing to be afraid of. You turn it on, it gives you, you can zero it out, and it'll give you just a decimal reading in inches of different diameters. So for instance, on a seal, this is something you can't really match up by eye, so you can use the caliper to measure this seal, and then you can take their seal and put it in here and determine if it's smaller or bigger, if it's the right size. Usually you can match a seal, a grease seal, just by taking the two, putting them together, kind of like a couple of quarters. The outer diameter is, you can tell if it's the same, but the inside diameter is where you need to be able to check this for the customer, because it's critical that, when they're trying to get them the right parts the first time. One other tool that we have, and you were all given one of these today, was for checking bearings and grease seals. This is kind of a quick way to do it, but it doesn't cover every single bearing and stuff that we have, just the real common stuff. So, for instance, customer walks in and they have a bearing and they hand it to you. We're over in the aisle here. You can slide this inside to check the diameter of the bearing. Okay. and then you use this end of the tool, again, for some of the common grease seals that we're going to run into. The most common stuff that we're going to run into is right on here. So this is a real quick tool. And then the other tool, we have several of these floating around. This is for checking the bolt pattern on drums and on hubs. So you're able to go ahead. So this lines up, and it's 5 bolt patterns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we see here that it's 4.5, so it's a 5 on 4.5 pattern. Customer, you've identified the hub that you want to give them, but you want to always check the bolt pattern. So those are the tools. Now, as long as we're talking about bolt patterns, customer comes into the store with a 4-bolt hub like this. If it is a trailer hub and it's not some sort of off of a car axle or something for a trailer that was made a long time ago, which we don't have those parts here, and we wouldn't know what car it came off of, because you will run into that stuff that just seems to be really odd and doesn't look like anything that we have here. Again, HannaRV, but typically maybe somebody made a trailer out of an old axle from a car or truck or something like that. There's a lot of that stuff out there. You know, years ago, before trailer production parts were really available, that's what people did. So a lot of that stuff, there's still a lot of that stuff out there. So, but if it's 4 bolts, there is only one 4-bolt pattern. So if they come in with a hub that looks like this, you match it up, and you don't have to worry about it. 4 bolts, 4 on 4 is the same. Same thing if you're helping a customer with a tire and wheel assembly or a rim. A 4-bolt pattern is a 4-bolt pattern. You don't have to worry about it. Five-bolt pattern. If it is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, if the inner and the outer diameter of the hub are the same, that's going to be a 2,000-pound hub assembly, and it will be a 5-bolt pattern, and it will be 5 on 4.5. It'll never be anything different. So the majority of the tires and wheels that we sell here are 5 on 4.5. If it is a 2,000-pound hub, again, it will be 5 on 4.5. It will be nothing different. There is nothing different in the industry. 5 on 4.5 pattern. All your travel trailers, all of your cargo trailers, all the enclosed trailers that we sell, or if somebody's coming in here with an enclosed trailer, they're looking for a hub, or if they're looking for a tire and wheel assembly, that 5 on 4.5 pattern is what you're going to be looking for. The performance trailers that we sell, and a lot of Texas-made utility trailers and utility trailers that are made down in Missouri have it, for whatever reason, they've chosen to use a 5 on 5 pattern. So we do have 5 on 5 tire and wheel assemblies in the 15-inch variety for replacements for our Parker trailers. Those are kept out in the shop so that customers aren't buying that thinking that's the right thing, because the majority of what people are coming through looking for. So if somebody says they have a performance trailer or a Parker trailer, one of the trailers that we've sold them over the years, the stuff that we have in the store, you have to go into the boiler room, and that's where we have those stored in there. And then they're in the system as a different part number. So we do have 5 on 5 hubs. There is also 5 on 4 3/4, and there is 5 on 5.5. We don't really stock those. They're very rare, especially in this part of the country. We don't see it very much. And it was typically used on older stuff, but we do happen to have a 5 on 4 3/4 sitting here. Dexter used to designate and paint the hubs a different color. They've done away with that. All the hubs now do come in black. So we had talked yesterday when we did some training that we're probably going to go to a system and buy some paint pens and make a chart, and Mike or whoever's putting them away is going to just put a dot on them with that color, so it's easy to identify on the shelf. So if somebody comes in, they want 5 on 5, you know, and it has a red, you look at the chart, okay, it's a red dot, you can look for a drum or a hub with a red dot on it, just to speed the process up of taking care of the customer. This is a 5-bolt. This happens to be a 5 on 4.5 pattern, but you'll notice here that the outer diameter and then the inner diameter of the hub are different. This is a 3,500 pound replacement hub assembly, and they run an inner and outer bearing that are different sizes. So when we go through the bearings, we're going to talk about that. And then if the trailer has brakes on it, we're going to have a brake drum. Again, there's going to be, these are going to have a outer diameter and an inner diameter that are different. So again, this would be something that would be subject to being a different bolt pattern, even though it's 5, where we'd need to check it. So when a customer comes in and they need wheel bearings, especially as you're kind of getting yourself introduced to this, you should be able to identify the 3 most common sizes of bearings that there are, which would be a 1-inch kit, inch and a 16th. Inch and a 16th and 1 inch are used on 2,000 pound or 2,200 pound axles, depending on how the manufacturer rated that axle. 1 inch is not really used a whole lot anymore, but it has been over time. Inch and a 16th is probably the second most common bearing kit that we sell. And then the most common bearing kit that we sell is for the 3,500 pound axle, which is, we talked about, has a different inner and outer diameter for the bearings. We sell this part number more than anything else. So, but all your small, if a customer is coming in and they tell you that they have a snowmobile trailer or they have a small boat trailer, you're going to more likely than not be looking at either 1 inch or inch and a 16th. So that's just something to kind of have on the top of your head. They tell you they have an enclosed cargo trailer, they have a small horse trailer, they have just a 25-foot travel trailer, or they have one of our performance trailers. It's going to have a 3,500 pound axle under it, more likely than not, and then it would be that inch and a 16th by inch and 3/8. And those numbers, what that indicates is the inner diameter of the bearing. We're going to look at the 3,500 pound bearing setup. The inner diameter of this is an inch and a 16th, and this right here is what's called a bearing race. This is what is on the inside of the hub here, and this is a machine piece that fits into the cast hub that gives a I guess like a machine finish, so that bearing can ride on it. It's a perfect surface. On the bearing here, this part is also considered to be a bearing race. So you actually have 2 races. One that's replaceable in the hub, and one that's actually part of your bearing. And that gives the bearings, the roller bearings, 2 perfect surfaces to ride on. So when a customer comes in with a hub and they have everything cleaned up for you, which sometimes they don't, and then we have to take it back to the service department and ask one of the guys to clean it up, because I don't want you to be getting all full of grease, and I don't want grease all over the store. We already have enough problems with customers coming over here by themselves. They don't have it cleaned up, and you come over here and they're getting stuff all over the place. We don't want to get it all over. We want to keep the store clean, obviously. But you really do need to have the parts clean so that you can handle them and identify them. On a bearing, on the inner edge here, it's very hard to see, but there is an actual number that says L44649. If you can read it, great. Makes your job a whole lot easier. A lot of times it's not readable. Same thing on the race itself. It does have a number. Nowadays, years ago they used to stamp the number in. They don't really stamp it in. They're using another process, so a lot of times it is not readable. I can identify a lot of stuff, and as you get better at this and you're doing it more, a lot of times you can identify it by the thickness of the race, or you'll just know what you're looking at eventually. But until then, you'll have to measure that inner diameter. With the 1 inch and the inch and a 16th, this bearing race is the same. So I can take a 1 inch diameter bearing and put it in here, and I can take the inch bearing and put it in here. It fits on the same race. You'll never run into a situation where you have a 1 inch and an inch and a 16th on the other side. It'll always be the same. It'll either be 1 inch inner and outer, or it'll be 1 1/16 inner and outer on these smaller hubs. So you're going to get your, in these kits you get an inner and outer bearing and race, which if the customer needs a replacement hub because the hub was damaged, if they had a bearing failure, a lot of times the hub itself gets damaged. If they buy a new hub, the race is already in there, so they won't use the races that are in the kit. They can throw them in a drawer or throw them out or whatever. And then it'll also come packaged with your grease seal and a cotter pin. When you're putting in, when the customer is putting this together and they put their bearings in, they grease it up, they'll put their grease seal on the inner side. It never goes on the outer side. Your dust cap goes towards the outside. So it'll go to the inner bearing, and then they can just take like a block of wood and put over the top of this and tap it in with a hammer until it's flush with the surface. So if they ask, sometimes customers think that they need to pound this in as far as it goes, and then it won't actually seal on the spindle. Which I do have a spindle here. So on this particular, you'd have an inch bearing and an inch bearing, and right here is where the seal would actually ride. So if they were to push that in too far, it would be in here, and it wouldn't actually be on that surface that seals it. So the other thing is that you want to tell a customer when they're putting this all back together too, to make sure that this surface is clean, make sure it's not all rusty, particularly on a snowmobile trailer where you get salt and stuff like that and it sits the majority of the year. There could be debris. Sometimes grease does weep past here, so now you have grease that wants to get road debris. On boat trailers, they go into the launch, grease gets past there, sand comes up and stuff like that, and it wants to stick to that grease. So that can act like a piece of sandpaper on that rubber, that seal, and destroy the seal. They could have a bearing failure from that. Okay, when they're putting their hub back together, through the end of the spindle, they'll have the nut that they will, after they put the hub on, with the bearings there, and they put everything together, they're going to tighten this nut up until there's no play in it. And then the kits come packaged with a cotter pin. But if you have a trailer that has an easy lube spindle on it, there's going to be a zerk on the end of the spindle. And that spindle is machined all the way through, so as they pump grease, it pumps it all the way to the back, and then it forces the old grease out the front. You can't put a cotter pin through that, so then you're going to see people walking through the door with things that look like this. This is they put this on, and they would tighten it up, and they would bend these little tabs over to keep the nut from backing off. That's the purpose of the cotter pin. You can't use that on an easy lube system, so you would bend these tabs down. Customers will come looking for that. Or the newest thing that we're seeing is Dexter has changed their spindle in the last year or so, and they are no longer using this. Other manufacturers are using it, but they're using this right here, which is called a bottle cap retainer, that kind of snaps over the nut. That particular nut is just a regular nut. It doesn't have the little slots in it. It's not a castle type nut where the cotter pin or those tabs could bend in, so it's a little bit different system. Just be aware of these types of things. Okay, there's also other bearing kits. We just kind of touched on the common ones. We have other sizes here for like the 5,200 pound and the 6,000 pound axles. We have those in this aisle. Again, same method of identifying what it is, measuring that inner diameter. You're also going to want to look into the redneck book too, because that tells you sometimes a customer will come in and they may not have they may have just brought one bearing, so you can identify that bearing by looking at that chart. You'll be able to tell the sister bearing that would run either on the inner and outer from that through those charts. So sometimes we can still help the customer, or we attempt to help the customer even if they don't have everything. Sometimes you can't help them, but we just do our best, and the chart that Redneck has in their book is pretty good, and I would say probably 75% of the time we're still able to help that customer and get them the parts that they need. So here's a 1036 and a 1010 grease seal. These would be for the 5,200 and 6,000 pound. Even I think they use them on some of the 7,000 pound axles. Outer diameters are identical. Inner diameter is slightly off. You can't really do it by eye. You'll have to measure these when they come through. Oftentimes, behind your castle nut, the customer will have a washer that's behind there. There's a couple different kinds. These are just two of them. There's about 3 or 4 different varieties. This one has a little tab on it. This one is just perfectly round. So we get a lot of questions from customers that they've been taking automotive and trailer stuff apart for years, and they went to repack their bearings, and they took this nut off, and there was no washer behind there. That is fine if that trailer came without a washer that was pre-assembled by the manufacturer. They designed it not to have that in there. All this washer really does is allow so that when they tighten that nut up, that they're able to tighten it all the way down and they don't run out of threads. If that customer wants to buy a washer and put it in there, they could do that. It's not going to hurt anything. But if they ask you and say, hey, I don't have a washer in there and I'm concerned about it, if that's the way the trailer came, that's fine. On the outside of their hub would be their grease cap. We have a variety of grease caps. Again, the way to identify these is by diameter, so our trusty caliper, or taking their grease cap and matching it up to this. This happens to be for an Easy Lube axle, because it has a rubber plug in the center of the cap so that they can get at that greaser that's on the end of the spindle to grease their bearings. It's not a replacement for repacking your bearings, but it is an extender on that maintenance interval. So we still tell customers they should do an old-fashioned bearing repack and replace the seal from time to time. Now you can use this cap even if it's not Easy Lube spindle. A lot of times it's just easy to grab this because it's in a package. If we know it's the right diameter, it'll fit in there. It's not going to hurt anything. And then also that little rubber plug in there. A lot of people lose those. We do sell those individually. These just have to be pounded on with a hammer, usually with a block of wood to give them the clearance that they need to tap it on. The other thing that customers could be using on the outside would be a bearing buddy. A lot of people want to put a bearing buddy on their trailer. It's not necessary to put it on every trailer, but it is absolutely a necessity on a boat trailer. The reason it's necessary on a boat trailer is that, I'll take one out of the package here and show you just how this works. This goes on just like a grease cap. Wood, they'd have to pound it on. But this zerk that's here that allows the grease to come into the hub, you would fill the hub completely with grease. And this particular one is the new style of bearing, but it has an indicator on it. So when the grease has completely filled the hub, the spring plate in here actually moves. So they can see that they've got it filled with grease. The old style works exactly the same. It just didn't have that little plastic indicator on there to let them know when they've got. So you don't want to overpack the hub with grease either. But what this does is it keeps about 3 psi of positive pressure inside the hub. So when you're going down the freeway at 65, 70 miles an hour, you've been driving for an hour to the lake, that hub is going to be warm. It shouldn't be hot, but it's going to be warm. It could be, especially if the trailer has brakes, it wouldn't be unusual if that drum could be 140 or 150 degrees. Now you take that into a lake that's 50 degrees. It acts as a quench and it wants to pull the water into the hub. That's just the physics of it. So by having the positive pressure in there, that is why you would have this on a boat trailer. They should still repack their bearings every year in case water would get in. And what I tell customers is that they may come in and they may have a bearing problem in June. And, well, I'm all good now, I'll do it again next year. No, you should actually do your bearings again that fall, in case any water did get in there. That way, all the money that you just spent, you're re-greasing your bearings. If there's water in there, you're getting it out. The bearings now sit for the winter season in fresh grease. They're actually ready for the summer. And you don't put it, whatever it is, they may come in here and spend $50, $100, $200 on parts or whatever that they need. And all of a sudden they get water in there and it sits all winter. It's going to rust their bearings. And now, if you get rust on a bearing on a roller, that's going to be an imperfection. That's going to be a potential failure. So something to tell a customer that, hey, I know you're doing this now, but make sure you do this again in the fall. So that we're trying to give them good advice. Whether they do it or not, that's on them. But sure, we're trying to educate our customers. Make happy customers. Hopefully they'll come back. We can save them some money and they come back for something else.
What happens when the bearings fail?
When the bearings fail, typically the rollers could start to peel. The cage could start to come apart, and then typically what happens is you'll lose one or the other bearing, and then this thing starts to kind of cock on there. They can ruin their spindle, which could potentially mean buying an accident. And when that does happen, a lot of times, why I tell you need to inspect their hub, especially if they had a bearing failure, because a lot of times this area from that castle nut that I was showing before will actually start to grind this away.
Also, you can see that it's been worn.
You can see that it's all worn, and then they won't be able to put their grease cap back on. So I always look at these two surfaces because you can usually just tell right away, and sell them the hub that they're going to need so that they don't go home, put new bearings in it, and find out, hey, their grease cap doesn't fit, and I got to take everything apart and buy a hub. So we want to take a look at that. Again, if you're unsure, come to Mark or myself, and we'll assist with that. The other thing is, if you're selling a customer a bearing buddy, if they come in looking for this, little hint that I tell them, we sell a lot of these bras because they actually blow off. People say, I just put it on and it fell off. Now what happened is it trapped air in here. These things fit so tight, and like right now I can't pull this off. It fits that tight. But what happens is you trap air in here and it warms up, and now it pushes it right off. So what I tell customers to do is just take a pin and poke a hole so that air can get in and out. Because the real reason that you're putting this bra on here is to keep debris, because this is going to have some grease and stuff that'll just going to seep by. Now you're going to go into like a launch with sand and stuff like that. Now that plate can't move. So a customer comes in with a hub, they're looking for bearings. We might want to tell that customer to take this apart and clean it thoroughly so that it can operate properly. There's a snap ring that can be removed. This whole thing can come apart. They can clean it and put it back together. So you want to see this plate being able to move. So you can just, one more thing you can tell the customer, or in the service department, they'll take these apart when they're doing a repack. If it needs to be, they physically take it apart, clean it, and just put it back together, just to get any sand or grit so that plate can move freely. Wheel bearing grease when you're in this aisle. Make sure the customer's got grease at home. If they don't, we've got tubs, we've got tubes. The corrosion block grease for marine customers. If they get water in there, this leaves a coating on the bearing that'll hopefully protect that bearing until they get it serviced. Again, here's another marine grease. We prefer the corrosion block, the grease that we use out in the shop. Okay, in aisle 4, we also have brakes as part of our running gear, our drums, but there's also the braking components, electric and hydraulic. Okay, aisle 4, running gear, I guess part 2. We're going to talk about the brakes, drums. We're going to talk about electric brakes and surge or hydraulic brakes. These are all parts to your axle components that we have in aisle 4. For brakes, we're going to start out. These are electric brake assemblies. They have an electronic magnet that's activated by the brake controller in the vehicle that's towing it. So essentially what is actually happening, just so you have an understanding of what's happening here and how this actually applies to brakes, is that when you energize this magnet, the brake controller sends different voltages back, depending on whether you're doing just a regular standard coming to a stop or if you're doing more of a panic stop. It's going to put more power to this magnet. As the drum is turning, that magnet is going to want to grab onto the drum. And because the drum is turning, it goes ahead and moves this arm, pushing the brake assembly, the brake shoes away. So it's pretty simple what's going on mechanically with an electronic brake. People are going to come in looking for brake parts. Sometimes we carry some of that stuff here. Redneck has, in their catalog, has a complete breakdown of every brake assembly in there, what parts are available. But if they need actual brake shoes, the magnet is due to replace. It's at its service life, and they should buy a vacuum plate rather than buying individual components, because it ends up being the same price, but this way they're getting brand new adjuster, they're getting new springs, and it's going to save them time, whether they're doing it themselves or if they're in a service department, it's going to save them labor, because this just bolts on and you connect the 2 wires. And the big question that everybody is going to ask you is, which wire do I connect? And it doesn't matter. You can connect either one of the wires that they have there. So just powering up a magnet. Now, the 2 most common sizes, this would be a 10-inch assembly. And then we also have the 12-inch assembly here. And then there's this little guy right here. You're going to see this on predominantly snowmobile trailers is where we see this the most. Majority of your travel trailers and cargo trailers are going to have the 10-inch. 12-inch is going to be heavier stuff, so bigger travel trailers, bigger fifth wheels, equipment type trailers for hauling like skidsters and stuff like that are going to have 12-inch. So we basically have brakes from 2,000 pounds to, depending on the trailer, up to 7,000 pound axles. We'll have that stuff in stock. Above that, we'd have to order it. And there's a lot of variations then. So as you're learning, again, you have to come and get Mark Ride to kind of help out. We also have started stocking these now too. Electric brakes are not self-adjusting, so after about 5,000 miles of city driving, your brakes could be out of adjustment. Your bearing service interval will be at 10,000 miles, so you could be driving around for 5,000 miles with your brakes out of adjustment, meaning you're not getting optimal braking. And guess what? Then that guy's truck is doing a portion of the braking, and you're driving around town with a 3/4 ton truck. If you're a contractor or something like that, it could be brakes on the front of those trucks could be $1,000. So you can tell the customer, hey, spending a little bit extra money. We do have these new assemblies now that are self-adjusting. This a couple years ago, these weren't available. It's about another $20 roughly per brake assembly. Those customers are going to see the value in that because they're going to know that the brakes are functioning properly all the time, and they don't have to get underneath there with a brake adjusting tool and adjust the brakes, or worry about potentially, brakes being on adjustment, being an employee or somebody driving that truck around, and you're wearing out the front brakes on the truck because the truck is doing braking that it shouldn't. So with the brake controllers that are out today and the components that are out there today, customer with everything set up properly and educated should be able to have their trailer mirror the braking of the truck, with each one braking independent of the other. That's really the goal, and it is achievable with the right components. This would be the next type of brake that you're going to deal with, which would be a surge or hydraulic brake. So this is a hydraulic system, much like is on a car. Drum brakes on a car would have a wheel cylinder that would receive brake fluid from the master cylinder and push the piston, again pushing the brakes apart. There's two types of surge brakes. That was just the standard. This has a weird looking plate right here. This is known as a free backing brake assembly. Surge brakes, because you're relying on the trailer pushing on the ball to activate the master cylinder in the brake actuator. There's usually a lockout that you have to get out of your vehicle and lock that actuator out so that it can't move, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a moment. But you're unable to back up because the trailer thinks you're applying the brakes, essentially, is what's happening. Some of them have a lockout solenoid, an electronic solenoid, that when you put your vehicle in reverse, it automatically is like a little solenoid that locks the brake fluid line. On some of your newer boat trailers and stuff, that's how it's done. But if you had free backing assemblies, you wouldn't have to worry about that. This up for a minute, and this would be the other thing that we would deal with, which would be disc brake, hydraulic disc brakes. Some of your newer boat trailers, some of your high-end snowmobile trailers, customers would operate them with a surge brake assembly, and it would be a disc. Don't stock a lot of those parts. There's a lot of different systems out there. Redneck carries some of them. UFP, which is a lot of what we're seeing in the marine industry today, which is unique functional products. Those products are distributed by Waymire, so you won't find that stuff in the Redneck catalog. So that's the Waymire catalog that we talked about earlier.
And it's mostly just for boat and marine stuff?
Yeah, mostly boat, and Triton does use it, a system, and they had various systems. If you look on our website, some of the older hydraulic parts that are on there. So you're going to see some surge stuff out there. Just a note on hydraulic brakes on trailers. If a guy is using a equipment trailer that has surge brakes on it, and he's running a business and has his name on his truck, he's using it for commercial purposes, It's illegal. Electric brakes are the only acceptable braking system for equipment trailers. So we've had a number of instances over the years. Guy has a skid steer trailer, gets pulled over, and gets ticketed for a couple of violations. Has to come here and get a DOT inspection performed. And it's never good news when we tell them that they got to convert their trailer from surge brakes to electric brakes in order to get that DOT sticker. But I don't know why it is, but that is in fact the law, that electric brakes are only for recreational use, so boat trailers, snowmobile trailer. A lot of pop-up camping trailers have surge brakes, and that's fine. Just cannot be used for commercial purposes. I don't know why that is, but that doesn't really make any sense to me, but it's just kind of the way things are. There are a lot of people out there running equipment trailers and stuff like that that have a skid steer trailer or something like that, and they've got hydraulic brakes on it, and they're pulling up behind their dump truck with their name on it. If they get pulled over, it'll be a problem for them. Probably if their trailer's in good working order and the lights are all working and stuff, they probably won't get pulled over, so it'll probably never be an issue. But if they do, their customer's not going to be real happy. It's not our fault, but it's the law. So here we have an example of a brake actuator. I'm not going to lift this piece up.
Move it.
If you can get a shot of that, Matt. This is for a larger equipment style trailer. What is essentially happening is that when the truck applies the brakes, this is going to push on the ball, and it's going to actually push this piece. This piece actually moves right here. This goes in and out. That's what actually pushes the master cylinder. So that's acting like when you're driving your car and you're putting your foot on the brake. It's the same type of a thing, but it's getting its cue off of the ball, and it's feeling that trailer pushing it. The harder the trailer, the heavier the trailer is, and the harder you brake, the more that's going to push, the harder it's going to push, the more fluid it's going to send to those wheel cylinders to apply the brakes.
It's based off of physics.
Yep. So we do have replacement components for a brake actuator. This is a larger one. There's a bunch of different types that are out there, different manufacturers of these things, but they are serviceable, meaning that you can buy replacement master cylinders. You can buy the replacement cap for where you put the brake fluid in. We have different shocks. These shocks that are inside, you can't really see them in here. They're internal in here. That just helps the actuator operate smoothly and not be real jerky. One of the things that you can do if you end up in a parking lot looking at a customer's trailer, or if they come in, or if they're just inquiring about it. All right, so surge brake parts. Again, master cylinders. This Atwood master cylinder right here, the most common thing you're going to see. We go through hundreds of these, easily identifiable because it's kind of a weird looking shape. Comes with a gasket and stuff like that. Customer wants to buy one of these. They should also get the replacement boot for the end. It doesn't come packaged. We sell it. We actually have an eBay listing where it kind of combines the two. And then we have the caps and other parts. We have some wheel cylinders here. So that's all I'm going to say really on surge brakes. Pretty simple. Electric brakes, going back to the electric brakes, real quickly, we do carry replacement shoes. Customer just needs replacement shoes if everything is fine. Way we would determine maybe a customer had their trailer sitting for a while, and sometimes they'll develop rust or moisture in between the actual lining and the shoe, and they'll just kind of pop off. Maybe it didn't have a lot of miles on it, maybe it's just sat for a long time, and they just want to buy shoes for it, and their magnet is still fine. One other thing I forgot to talk about too when we had the drums before is this surface is where the magnet actually rides. It's a machine finish. It's nice and smooth so that magnet it's constantly rubbing on here, and that's what it's grabbing on. It's called the armature surface of the drum. We can't machine these surfaces in here. It's not worth it. Anything from like 7,000 pound on down, we don't machine. We don't send them out and machine them. It takes too much. Customers better served to just buy a new drum because once you take some of the imperfections out of here, you might be down to the wheel studs, and it's going to be junk anyway. You just wasted a half hour on the machine for a technician to do it. But this surface right here has to be smooth. Customer comes in with a drum, they want to know if their drum is still good, if they can reuse it, or an indicator that they're going to need a drum. If this surface isn't smooth, you rub your finger across and you get a bunch of high and low spots. If they put a brand new magnet on it, or it's riding on those high spots, it's just going to wreck their magnet, so they need to buy a drum. And then also the shoe surface, a lot of times will have a big ridge here because the drum is getting worn out. So those are just things to look at. So brake shoes, we do have replacement magnets here. You notice we have two right here that look the same. These are going to be like the two most common that we sell. They look exactly the same, but they are different. This one's got green wires, this one's got black wires. It actually means something. It is an identifier. It's identified in the redneck book as to what color wires for what pound brake assembly. So it has to do with the weight ratings. So it actually means something. In this aisle too, lug nuts, wheel studs, stuff that people are going to come in and look for. We also have a large selection of these back at the parts desk, where it's bins where we just have to go ahead and take theirs and match it up through the bins. But the most common ones that we sell a lot of, we have out on the floor here, pre-packaged. And then finally, for electric brakes, we have a breakaway system. What a breakaway system is that the trailer, if it would come disengaged for whatever reason, the breakaway kit has a battery, so that in the event that it is disconnected, you have something called a breakaway switch, which is mounted to the trailer, which has a cable which you would attach to your vehicle that you're towing with. If it came disconnected, the cable would pull the pin out of the switch, making contact so that it can get power off this battery, put power to the electric brakes to bring that trailer to stop. 1994 federal safety standard. Surge brakes also on the actuator, if you look closely at them, they all have a cable that you would hook to the vehicle, that if it came disconnected, you would pull that cable so hard you would pull a lever and it would manually push the master cylinder all the way so the trailer would come to a stop. So those are just safety standards. We have a number of different kits. We have different replacement switches, different replacement cables. We have these nice cables right here that are coiled. A lot of customers like these because it's not hanging around. It's always the right length for them. They don't drag it on the ground. And then probably our number one seller here, the Engager breakaway system. This is really nice. It's a complete system right here. It's the battery box, the battery, the switch, and everything that you need right in here. The cool thing about this is you can press the button and you can tell him what kind of shape your battery is in. Customer gets pulled over, gets inspected. He's scoring some brownie points with the officer. You can see that his battery's in good shape real easily. They like to see that. So you can tell a customer that it's an easy way to sell this product. The other thing is that there are some of these kits come with a charger so that they can run a hotline off their vehicle and charge this battery as they're driving down the road. So some of them have a built-in charger that comes with it, or they can buy a charger separately, just something to be aware of if the customer asks for it. That's basically it.